All right, so thank you for joining this little mini webinar. Took a little bit to see if we can get these things up and running, but it seems to at least be running. There's a little bit of a delay, but it seems to be running fine. These are going to be a series of smaller webinars I'm going to do that are only going to take about 15 to 20 minutes or so to showcase individual topics or features or little bits of functionality in Magium. Magium, if you're not totally familiar with it, is essentially a project that I started to help make Selenium testing and automated testing much easier in the Magento ecosystem by basically batching a number of different operations and things like checkout, navigating to cart, things like that. And then building within a framework that's easily reusable. In this item here, we're going to look at how you can use an abstract configurable element to configure Magium to actually work with your system. There are a number of different objects or classes in Magium that utilize the abstract configurable element class. And these are objects that are intended to be manipulated by yourself. So there are essentially three different mechanisms that are used. I'm going to show you where they're actually defined. So if I go to the abstract configurable element, if I can find it there it is, right at the top. It has in its constructor, everything utilizes constructor-based dependency injection. It has in its constructor a provider called the standard configuration provider. This standard configuration provider itself has three individual configuration readers that it's going to use. It's going to have the configuration reader, the standard configuration reader, which is actually used on the command line interface. The class configuration reader, which utilizes a series of directory and file naming mechanisms to do its thing. And then the environment configuration reader, which will read configuration values from the environment variables. Each of these individual readers has a different purpose. The environment configuration reader is there primarily for continuous integration environments, so that you can make these kinds of configuration changes on a CI run by CI run type of scenario. It's not really meant to be there so that individual users or individual developers can have different bits of functionality, and it's primarily going to be used for doing things like changing the base URL of your Magento implementation based off of the test run you're actually doing. So you can utilize that in your continuous integration environment. The configuration reader, the standard configuration reader, is largely for command line interface junkies who really like the command line. I personally think it's a decent way of configuring Magium, but my personal preference is to use the class level of configuration reader, which is the one that we're going to be looking at here by default. And the reason why I like it is because the way it's built, it allows you to very easily use code completion, very easy to debug, and things like that. And I'm going to focus primarily on that one. So let's take a quick look at the class configuration reader so you can see what I'm talking about. We go back into this method here called configure. This is all handled behind the scenes. You don't really need to know this, but I think that sometimes context is useful to show people good information here. If a configuration is not provided, and usually it's not, if it is provided, then this system will basically ignore all this and just do a file inclusion and be done with it. But if you use the default mechanism, which is to not provide a file, it's going to look for a directory called configuration in the base directory of your file. It'll basically go down, as you can see here, 10 child levels deep. And if it doesn't find the configuration file, then it'll just basically, or the configuration directory, it'll basically just fail. Not fail, it just won't include the file. And it basically looks to see if it can find a file name that matches the class name that is defined in there. So the way this actually looks, let's kind of look in this in one example. We're going to build out a test scenario here, and we can see how this actually works. So we'll create a directory called tests, and create a new test called it's called configuration test, and we'll create a new namespace, my tests class configuration test extends abstract Magento test case, which is a very important thing to do because there's a lot of base functionality in there. And let's do public function test configuration. That's where my fingers were going. So we'll do a simple thing. We'll do this command open, which will actually open the browser. And we'll get the theme, and this is the part that we're going to be looking at here in just a second. We're going to get the theme, and in these theme classes, there is a method called getBaseURL, which will retrieve the base URL of the system. So once that page is open, we'll get a navigator, and we are going to go to the default simple product category. Don't worry about that too much right now. It's just going to take us to a category that has been defined. We'll see where it's defined later on. And we will navigate to. All right, we'll run this. Then this should fail. And the reason it'll fail is because I don't actually have a WebDriver running on the local host. And we see here it says the site can't be reached, and the test is going to be failed. So going back again to our class configuration reader, we have a directory here called configuration. So we're going to go into our project directory and create our configuration directory. Now what we need to do is we need to tell the system how to reconfigure that object. And the way we do that is in this case, because we're looking at the themes, we're going to go to the theme configuration object for the default Magento installation, which is just Magento 1.9. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to open up my class search in PHP Storm here, and I'm going to look for the file called theme configuration, or the class called theme configuration. Inside, in my search results here, you'll see all the different theme files that are in there. And we're just going to be doing the Magento themes Magento 1.9, which is Magento CE 1.9 theme configuration. This theme configuration file here contains all the XPaths and a couple of defaults that are specified for your individual implementation. So the way we tell the configuration system to work is we'll copy this entire namespace and go to our configuration directory and create an entire directory path in there. And this is actually one of the first times I've actually appreciated having the backslash as the namespace separator because it's very easy to paste in there and create that directory. So now that we've actually created the directory, we need to create a PHP file that's going to interact with the configuration proxy. So we'll just take that, copy it, and we'll create a new PHP file. And this is why I like this approach as opposed to using the command line. I can do something like this, where I go var this, properly named variable, and it's going to be theme configuration, and it's going to be Magento 1.9. So I can give myself that type hint there, and there's the base URL. Property in there. I'm going to change it to Magento 1.9.loc, and then we are going to rerun that test. And we see that it's coming up on Magento 1.9, and the test actually passes. Let's go back to let's close out some of these windows here because there's kind of too many of them. Go to our configuration test, and I'm going to just set an arbitrary breakpoint in here so that we can actually see it happening. So we can pause it. We've set the base URL here, and it's going to then navigate to the default category for the product, for the simple products. Now let's say you have a category that isn't the sample data. You want to change it to something else. Now if we go into this default simple product category class, you'll see that it actually has a theme in there. Again, a lot of these classes are going to reutilize theme configuration information so that when you change it once, it's going to change it all over the place and essentially reconfigure itself. In there, this default simple product category has a property called get navigation path to simple product category. If we go to this, this will take us to an abstract theme configuration. Let me go to the here. If we take this, you'll actually see here navigation path to simple product category. And we see accessories jewelry in there, which is what we have right here. We're going to accessories jewelry. Let's change that to something simple then. Something like sales accessories, because that's also going to have simple products on there. So let's finish up this debug session and go back to our theme configuration. And we're going to, again, we know we're looking for the simple product category, so we're going to do this. We'll just type in simple navigation path to simple product category. There we go. And type in sale/accessories. And this time, we'll run it. And now we're going to sale accessories. So any part of your testing scenarios that utilizes a simple product to do its test, you can now navigate to wherever it is in the catalog and use that as a standard jumping point to actually implement that functionality. Simply by changing that one property in your in that theme configuration file following that naming structure. So I'm going to take a quick jump into a simpler or into a more complex example, but I'm not going to necessarily show you exactly how to do it because there's some more complexity here and you really need to have your own system in order to do it. A key part of building out these tests in an automated fashion is telling the system how to navigate to various categories. If your navigation is based off of the standard RWD or the default templates, and you're just using CSS skinning to change things, then this should actually work right out of the box. But if you make any changes to the actual navigation structure, you're going to have to tell Magium how to actually manage that. That is done in the base menu navigator. The base menu navigator requires two things, and it gets those two things from the theme configuration. Again, it's injected as passing a navigable theme interface, which is just basically a fancy way of just making sure that you have that information there. But the two things it needs are the base XPath selector and then a child XPath selector. The child XPath selector is iterated for each time you have a slash in your product category. So in here, if you did sales/accessories/something, it would do a third iteration of that child XPath. So if we go into here, we can actually go to our theme configuration. We can actually see that right up here at the top. Navigation base XPath selector, navigation child XPath selector. And you'll use these to try and find the right elements to click on. And the way that would look, I'm not going to test it out, but just to show you, is you just go in here and then you would do this base navigation base XPath selector equals whatever. Oops, not right. And this navigation child XPath selector equals whatever that's going to be as well. So you set that up, and if it's all done in a predictable fashion, you're actually going to be able to go in and make very global changes by making those two items configurable in this theme configuration. Now, that's well and good. So far, we're talking about things like getting the base URL, changing your navigation XPath, and changing your categories, which are all fairly easy to do. But what happens when you need to try and do something where somebody is going to log in? In Magium, that is done through the use of an identity class. The identity class is going to provide information about who an individual is. By default, it's going to have the username, the email address test@example.com, and by default, it's going to have the password of password. Now, you may want to change that because it may not, your system may not allow for that. It may not happen. I've built my system so that it has a test@example.com identity in there, so the defaults will work, but yours may not. And so what we can do then here, let's build a quick test that does a navigation and login. So we will get rid of this, and we will get that. We'll copy that, and we'll do public function test login. Paste in the base URL, because you always have to start from the base URL. It doesn't default. It's not going to guess for you, because if you do too much guessing, then the system is going to be unpredictable. So we specify the URL again at the beginning of each test, and we're going to get a specific action. Now, if you remember back to the Getting to Know Magium webinar, there are about 6 different types. You have actions that are going to do something, navigators that are going to go somewhere, identities that are going to represent someone, and assertions that are going to represent assertions, and so on and so forth. Because we're going to be doing something, we're going to be utilizing an action. So this get action, and this is a special action called navigate and login. What it'll do is it'll navigate to the login page and will log in for you. And it has a method called login, and we'll put in our value there. So we will run this, and I'm going to actually go to the action, and I'm going to, oh, I already have a breakpoint set there. I will set it up there. I'll go back to my test, and I will debug this. Now it'll load up the page, it'll navigate to the login screen, and then it breaks here. Now, we didn't provide a username and a password, and the reason we didn't is because we're going to utilize that default customer identity. And it is provided as part of the constructor dependency injection. If we look at $this, we'll see that our customer identity is passed in. So we go through our test, or we step over the lines of code. We get the username defined as test@example.com. Password is defined as password, which again are the defaults. Go through a couple of insertions, set the username, set the password, which are then going to be here in the form. Hit click, and it is logging in eventually. All right, logged in. Now, like I said, what if your system doesn't allow for that? Well, we're going to go then to the customer identity. We're going to get our namespace. Again, we're going to create a new directory, and we're going to create a new PHP file that matches the name of the class. Just as before, we're going to use code completion or type hints. So var this is going to be customer. This email address equals kschrader@roshworks.com. Change that, and then we'll rerun the test. And now, when we go through our navigator, we see that our username is my original, or my new username. Password is still the same because we didn't change it through the configuration. And the test succeeds. So that's a basic rundown on how you can configure Magium to actually utilize your own system, or utilize some of your own configuration options, and reutilize a lot of this functionality that's built into Magium. So now what I'm going to try and do, depending on how well Google Hangouts actually works, I would like to get some questions. I don't know if it's actually going to work because Google Hangouts is not giving me a place where I can communicate with you guys. What you can do is, if you do have a question, real quick, since it's not really coming up, and I'll give you just a second here to do it, tweet to Magium Lib. Let me, if you don't know how to spell it, at Magium Lib, and I'll watch here for some tweets for just a couple of minutes, just because I wish I had a way of doing it, but it's not popping up. Is there a best practice for populating the database prior to testing? What I've actually done with this system, first of all, no, I don't have a specific best practice. This is largely on how do you streamline the individual tests themselves. Now, there's a lot that can go on with that. Normally, what I would say is to drop the database and put in a new database in there. But the problem is that oftentimes a lot of these databases are rather large. So if you can do that, prior to a continuous integration run, just swap out an old database or a previous database. That's not necessarily a bad idea. I think that's probably a decent way of doing it. Or if you have a sample database that you work off of, that's fairly standard. That's another way of doing it as well. The tests themselves, however, are built to work off of what is what you're going to expect in production. Your production database is not going to be the same each and individual time. And so the tests that I have built out myself have been ones that actually take that into account. So say, for example, you need to look at an order number. I haven't talked about extractors yet. But if you take a look at the extractors, you can extract the order number and navigate to a place in the admin where the order is actually, where you can look at the order information there and do your extractions on that. So to some degree, the hope would be that you can build your tests in such a way that they don't require pristine data. And I would say that 90% of tests don't. Now, if you're going to do some kind of installation test, or if you want to script doing an installation via Magento Connect or something like that, that's going to be a little bit more difficult because you actually do need to have a pristine database. But my experience has been that most tests don't actually require that, and I think that would be a valuable thing to try and build your tests in a way that it actually mimics what you're going to be seeing in production. Right. Does that imply that you can use Magium itself to populate? Sorry. Does that imply that you can use Magium itself to populate data by creating orders/customers and then use it to test afterwards? Absolutely, 100% yes. Okay. I'm just going to show you a really quick thing here. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but just one of the things that you can do. Let me just do. All right. I'll just do this kind of the pseudocode approach. This. Get navigator, we go to default simple product category, navigate to, and we'll do this, get navigator default simple product, navigate to, and this, get action, add simple product to cart, execute. Now here's the fun part. This get action, I think it's register. No, do a search by checkout. Register new customer checkout. Action, execute. Now, register new customer checkout has an identity as an option, but what it does is it actually changes the email address, so you can actually create a new test account. And so if you do like email equals this, get identity, get email address, you will get the new email address that register new customer checkout caused. So yeah, you can go through and you can really populate your database with a lot of orders like that. Let's see. A question here from what I've seen that Magium Magento is a. Okay, I've seen that Magium Magento is a library on top of Magium. So what is all necessary to use it with Magento? So Magium. my view of Magium over the long term is going to be that that it's not just going to be Magento that can actually use it. There could be a Magium Drupal. There could be a Magium WordPress. And so there's base functionality in the Magium library that is going to be pertinent to all the different implementations of Magium that are going to be there. So a lot of stuff that's actually was actually originally in just a single Magento project, but then I actually split it out into two projects based off of its global utility. And so that's why you'll see multiple different Magium. What do I want to say? Magium libraries that are going to be available there. All right, that looks like that's all the questions we have for now. I would love to get any kind of feedback that you have. You can contact me at kpschrade or MagiumLib on Twitter. You can go to facebook.com/MagiumLib, go to eschrade.com, which is my blog, or go to the MagiumLib.com website for any information you want about Magium. And then the last part is, if you're not on here already, you can sign up for for the newsletter, and you get notifications of any kind of webinars, new information, and I try to send out a weekly email on new things that are happening in Magium. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope to see you again soon.